Good evening, and I'm really happy to be here and talking to so many young people. Um, I think to me, a skill which I learned and which I think is very important is to be able to see yourself in your work and also be able to see the big picture at the same time. So, in whichever sphere you're working, to be able to understand the larger ecosystem of where you are, whether you're working in a bank or a not for profit or a college, to be able to understand uh, not just your place in that ecosystem, but that whole organization's place in the larger ecosystem. This is really important because then you're not just somebody who is doing whatever you're told, especially when you're young and you're mostly asked to do things, but you're able to also think more creatively uh, about your world and what you could do in it. Obviously, it's not going to happen right away. You cannot go and say, let's paint all the doors green. But uh, you begin to make connections, and you begin to think of yourself uh, in a larger way than what you actually are at that moment of time.
That's a really interesting takeaway as like knowing that what's around you all the time. We wanted to ask Rachita ma'am the same question actually. Since this is youth skills panel, we wanted to know the skills that you think are important.
I mean, to start with, I agree with Nandini on what she said. I think understanding yourself as like an individual who is working in a system not only kind of helps you, be more creative, but also really build on your learning, because you're then kind of learning and adapting yourself in reference or in context to that system, and that's like super important, I feel. The other aspect I feel, in addition to that, is really just interest in learning. I think making learning as a centerpiece, so all the skills that are required for learning itself, like, being critical, asking questions, learning how to think from other people's perspective, thinking in analogies, thinking in, being curious about things, understanding the whole, as Nandini just pointed out. I think those aspects are super, super important in terms of just having that orientation of saying, I am here to learn. The third aspect that I feel, again, and we are going more into like intangible and qualitative skills, definitely. But it is the other aspect is kind of looking at problem solving. And again, it's linked to learning itself in many ways for me. But I feel like that's a gap, that it's not just a gap that is going to be super critical in skills in the future, but also it's a gap in, like, you can't really blame people for it because the system is not really oriented towards that, right? So even if we're in school, you have an exam and your problem solving definition is basically a math problem where a plus b is equal to c, right? So even problem solving is not really the kind of problem solving that you need in a day-to-day life, right? So school is not orienting you towards that. If you're working in a job, you're given a particular task, and you're kind of looking at solving that task, but you're not looking at problem solving from that bigger picture and my role in that problem solving. So those are, I think, some of the things that we can, of course, as individuals, be conscious about when we can take that agency or that kind of lead in our own learning process when we're young. But of course, there is a role for a system to kind of contribute to that as well. But that would be like, the three definite kind of skills that I feel would be super critical for tomorrow or today and yesterday.
I completely agree with Rachita ma'am on this, and I also think that the whole system of problem solving is not really emphasized in today's education system. But I'd also like to talk about a personal example that I am from the level 3 school, and here We have always emphasized problem solving over memorization and just vomiting out all that we memorize into exams. We actually don't really even have exams in the conventional sense of it. And are rather encouraged to read books and look around us and learn from our surroundings and ecosystem, as Nandini ma'am also mentioned. So continuing with that, I'd also like to ask Professor Nandini, what changes would you like to see in the current education system to reflect the skills that are important in today's world?
Firstly, please call me Nandini because that's what all my students call me. I'm a little spoiled because I teach in an art and design school, which is very forward thinking. So I don't come from a mainstream educational uh, institution. Uh, but I think one even in my college, I feel there's a big gap between the real world and what you're learning, and it's I'm talking as an older person. When we were younger, we interacted a lot with the world in the sense, I don't know if I'm wrong about this, but we were a lot more free. We went to many places. The world was maybe a safer place. So we traveled on our own. We interacted a lot with the world. But today I find a lot of my students haven't really been on their own, and their time has been filled up. I'm talking about all economic stratas. Their time has been filled up with coaching sessions and hobby classes and so many things that they've not just sat at a bus stand and stared at the world going by. So when they come to college, they they know a lot of things, but they are not able to relate it to the world. It happens when I travel with my students. So notionally, you know a lot of things. You know, like say about millets or millet farming, but you you can't go there and relate to that farmer. You know, so this is a big gap. It's a very simple thing, but so it also translates to a certain lack of empathy for other people. So there's so much emphasis on being in a career and doing well and so on and so forth, that almost every profession is about you're doing something for other people, you're not doing it for yourself. Even the most creative artist has an audience. So it is that interaction with people and the world which somehow needs to be built in far more, I feel.
That's very interesting because that was one of the things that when we were creating this question, we were thinking about were like how there's always an emphasis on these technical skills that you have to learn, but not really on soft skills. And one of them that we really mentioned was empathy, along with writing, public speaking, things that go into the professional career, but we don't learn in school as much and aren't emphasized as much. And going back to what Rachita ma'am said in the previous question, like the idea of just being curious, I feel like we aren't encouraged to just be curious and take a risk or fail in school. Especially in high school, I know going to high school where I was like, oh, we want to go to a good college, so we have to get number one, and we don't really get that chance to explore as much. So that's based on my personal experience. But then when I got to college and was able to like pick up different projects at my school, and failing was encouraged as long as you could explain why your thing failed, I found that to be really beneficial in my education. So you said exactly what I was thinking and more. So we would also like to pose this question to the audience. It's kind of a big one, but what are changes that you want to see in the education system and why, especially when it comes to your personal experience? So we'd love you to think about that. We are making the audience do a lot of work, but we have another question for you to also think about. Um, we want to move on to the idea of sustainability. When you think of this word, what are the first three words you think of when you think of the word sustainability? We see the word sustainability as a keyword being used everywhere around us now more than ever. Rachita ma'am, we would ask you to define the word sustainability and how the word has changed and evolved over the last 15 to 20 years.
I don't know if I'm like the right person to answer the last piece, which is how it's changed over the years, but I can like maybe just share some of my experiences and how I've been thinking about it, questioning it, and etc. etc. Before that, I also wanted to just add something to what Nandini was saying, which is I really feel like that aspect that you mentioned around like just gathering experiences is so underrated. And I don't know if the way that a lot of people interact these days is so much in your own bubble, social media giving you things that you want to read, that it really stops you from understanding the other perspective. And that is super critical, because just to share one of my experiences, like when I joined Selco, it was a very different world for me, because I hadn't really engaged with the grassroots the way the organization and some of my colleagues did. And I would sometimes say things which I thought were solutions, and I would be so excited by it. And then people who had actually just spent so much time in slums in Bangalore, for example, would immediately be like, that's not going to work because of da 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 da. And they were reasons which were very human centric. Like, say for example, you're saying, we probably, people are having milk in slums, we should have a grocery shop which has a refrigerator. Milk is so important for nutrition. And my colleague was just like, no, they use milk powder, they can't use milk because the cats will drink it, or the rat will drink it, or like, and I'm just like, I couldn't even imagine that was the context in which we're thinking about the problem itself. So I think like getting that instinct, which really comes from experience over time, is something that is really underrated. But also I feel a lot of people don't have patience to cultivate and nurture and nourish that in their kind of learning process itself. So you don't invest in actually just focusing on your experiences. On the sustainability, I was kind of quickly looking up when you were saying that as well, is I found it very funny that when you Google it, the first thing that comes is it says ability to maintain or support a process continuously over time. It basically comes from the thing of having, being able to sustain something. And I was kind of like questioning that as soon as I read it, because I was like, is sustainability even relevant today as a word? Because we don't want to sustain what is there right now. You want to change it. It has to be something which kind of is a lot more productive and path breaking, because things have changed so much, I think, since the word sustainability was founded, maybe. So we need maybe a new direction in which we need to interpret and act on what sustainability kind of means to us as well. And these are just random thoughts that I'm saying, like, I'm sure people have defined it in a much better manner. The other two things that come to mind, which I think, like, when I look back, there are like two kind of quotes that I remember people saying, which kind of really stuck to me. And I always kind of go back to it, which I wanted to share. The first was in a conference which was actually hosted by Srishti, which I attended when I was in college. And it was on design thinking, it was on sustainability, and it was basically quoting from another book, but it was this guy called John Thakura, who's, I think, was leading this idea called doors of perception at that point of time. And he basically said, a thief who tells a judge he's stealing less than before will receive no leniency. So why do companies get environmental awards for polluting less, even though they are still polluting? Right. And that was something that kind of really, I was just like, yeah, that's true. Like, we need to not just do less, we need to do more good. And that is, again, like another philosophy or another kind of thought process that people like, Bill McDonough kind of look for, which is really saying, we're mostly talking about efficiency, which is doing a bad thing a little better. But what we've reached a stage is really like transformative solutions, which are doing more good than less bad. There's a slight difference there, which I think we all should be going into kind of questioning at this point of time. So I think, like, even when we say about sustainability, in the past you could say social sustainability is equal to equity, right? But right now equity itself can be questioned. So you need to do a lot more good than just make things even. So it is a little tricky, I think, the way that the word needs to be interpreted in today's world, so to say. But yeah, I'll pause here maybe, and then Adishri, go ahead. Adishri and Rachita.
Especially the part about how we need to do more good and not just be applauded on doing less of the bad. So we really need to encourage more young people to be interested in pursuing sustainability and in doing better like that. So Rachita ma'am and Nandini ma'am, I'd like to ask you both, how do we encourage more young people to be interested in pursuing sustainability?
Well, I think the meaning of the word sustain holds good. It is to keep something going. And it's not just the environment, it has to be culturally, socially, and financially sustainable for it to be actually long term kind of something that lasts. So, I think if I take the example of clothes, fabric, in India 50 years back, we never threw anything away. Okay, we mended stuff. Uh, when they became unmendable, we made them into quilts or we made them into dusters, whatever. But nothing got thrown away. And socially, it was acceptable for you to wear something that was darned. It was not a bad thing to wear a mended shirt, you know. So culturally and socially, we accepted, okay, this is a careful person, and it was fine. And somewhere along the way, that changed with more man-made materials, with fast fashion, with stores, and now uh, a lot of people think that it's bad to wear last year's styles. You know, so this shift happened on all the fronts, right? We changed even culturally. So, one way forward could possibly be that we become again more individualist. We think for ourselves instead of accepting these memes or these norms which are given to us from somewhere else. You know, I'm not just saying let's be nostalgic and go back to a simpler time. We can't be, but we can think for ourselves, right? We can be more individual in the way we approach materials, products, or anything that we use. We don't have to accept that milk comes in packets, which we do accept now. But we don't have to. Who said that milk comes from cows? There's no there's no argument there. So to go back to thinking about basics and to then it's each person's choice, right? I mean, I know somebody who's reforested an entire landscape, and I know somebody who's composting their wet waste. So there are scales and there are different levels and ways to do it, but each person is thinking about themselves. There is no formula to this.
Rachita, also to what you were um, asking, definitely like to agreeing with Nandini that there is a lot that we can be doing as individual choices in like our personal lives, right? Kind of questioning if we can actually kind of not look at the norm as a norm and go towards some idea of sustainability. But there is a lot that we can kind of carry forward in our work as well, because there is, I think like sometimes slightly disagreeing with Nandini that sometimes kind of looking at it as an individual choice that we need to make in our personal lives makes it like, in a silo that's the only space where I can intervene. But there is a lot that can be done in terms of your work as well, because like, let's agree, like, we spend 5 to 6 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day in our complete mind on our work, and can we make that interesting and going towards sustainability as well. So of course, one aspect is that, the way that you kind of look at your career path, the way that, and it's not just kind of saying, join the social sector and be part of an NGO. You can be a designer, you can be an enterprise, you can be in the policy space, you can be a lawyer, you can be doing anything at all and have a sustainable viewpoint. The problem is often that I feel like, when you think of joining, and I was sharing this with one of our colleagues as well, when you think of joining Amazon, you never even think that you can, do something around problem solving and sustainability and all of those aspects. But why? Right? So I think like that is something that itself people like I think we need to break that, the barrier that might be there in our minds, like, that no matter where you're joining, you're going with that own personal agenda of changing something, of learning something. And it's okay, let them throw questions at you of saying that, why should we as a company do sustainability? It will just make the solution finding process more interesting, right? So I think like that's another aspect that I feel like when people feel like they have to give something back, you have to move away from what you're doing. You move away from your core technical skills that you have acquired over a period of time. But it's not true. There is a lot that can be done there itself if you're applying it towards some of these issues that of course we're talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree that it, it's not something that you do. It's how you are. It's how you be.
Yeah.
And it's not like I compost my wet waste. It's not that. It's a whole way of being, and it. I also belong to that school of thought that we don't have a choice in it anymore. I mean, it is a doomsday scenario. There is an apocalypse coming up, and there's no longer a choice. And this is one tactic that I've used in my work life when I was younger, is that when I'm at work, I things are thrown and things are discussed. I go home and think about it, and I doodle, I mind map, I think more about whatever that is. And then at some other point, I go back and say, okay, see, this is what I thought. And very few people do that. So often, you're the only person who's thought about it. In any organization, people just switch off when they go home. So even if you spend half an hour drawing something out or finishing some thought, basically, to it's not giving advice. It is not saying let's do this or that. It's not that. It is just expanding and working on the problem, teasing it a little bit till there is something a little more solid, and having a stake in it, putting yourself in it and say, I've got my skin in this game. It's not, I'm not giving you advice on what to do. Yeah, and sooner or later, since more or less you'll be the only person doing it, people will listen to you, even if you're in Amazon or wherever.
You both hit the nail on the head, because that's exactly what we've been talking about this whole time, is like creating sustainability as a mindset, right? Rather than like sustainability when you're in environmental engineering or something so specific like that. So that's exactly what our next question is about. We would like to pose it to the audience first is, do you feel like there's a gap being sustainable in your career and being sustainable in your personal life? We have one audience member, Supriya, who would like to share her thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Srishti, for the question. So yeah, I feel I fit more into the question that you asked, since I come from the agriculture background. The family is completely into agriculture, and also I being having an education background of agriculture and working professionally in the agriculture field itself has given me a lot of plans that I could take forward for my future, as a sustainable plan itself, where I really wanted to take forward the plans that I have. I mean, professionally, I've been able to like meet a lot of farmers and learn from them as well. Like I don't think any education university would have had given me this opportunity to learn a lot that I'm getting to learn from the farmers regarding the sustainable, practices that the farmers are inculcating in their day-to-day, work itself. So this has helped me a lot actually to think from the futuristic plans that I have for my own. I mean, for myself, that I have in future, that I wanted to take up agriculture as a profession where it really like aligns with the plan that I have, and the profession and the personal life is really like going well aligned when I think from the perspective of sustainability, because I'm getting to learn a lot in day-to-day activity, that I'm being engaging a lot in the grassroots level and engaging with the farmers a lot. So I've been able to learn a lot from the farmers on sustainability. So this has given me a lot of exposure on what I could take forward for my future self as well. Thank you.
That's very interesting hearing from like an agriculture background and technical background, how you've implemented sustainable practices in your day-to-day life. We also want to invite Rucha to come and speak about her experiences also. How do you think we can bridge the gap in being sustainable in your career as well as in your personal life? We'll wait 1 second for her to be.
So basically, what I feel is that there's a preconceived notion where we tend to think that that sustainability is also more about, like, so if, say for example, you're working in a development sector, that means that you're doing charity, because that's the first thing that comes to the minds of people when I say to my chartered accountant friends that I'm working in the social sector. But more often it is also about working with the MSME sector, helping create more entrepreneurs. And I mean, I felt like this was a natural career progression for me, having a chartered accountancy background, and to be able to help people further their livelihoods is the way I feel to go ahead. So like it said, no, like doctors are there to actually look after your health. Similarly, a chartered accountant is there to look after your wealth. So in that sense, I think working in livelihoods is I think a natural career path for me. And this is where I am working in Selco Foundation in the knowledge team and trying to help make finance easier and understandable for the farmers and for the social sector. So yeah.
These are some quite interesting inputs from different people in different backgrounds who really are helping us to understand what sustainability means to us. So I'd like to ask Rachita ma'am, how do you see the meaning of sustainability evolving in the future?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Rachita?
How do you see the meaning of sustainability evolving in the future?
I mean, I think it's the same way like how we've been discussing, that it has to kind of move. I mean, I don't know, I'm making some assumptions here as well, but and this is again coming from my experience in my bubble, is that sometimes sustainability is kind of productized a little bit, like doing this is sustainable, owning this is sustainable, in putting your time towards this is sustainable. But I really feel like it needs to expand to kind of just imbibing that as the way of being, as a way of thinking, and because the going back to what I said earlier, like I really feel like people who are in this thought process would need to continuously evolve their meaning of sustainability and what it means to them and what it means to their work and what it means to their way of life in the age that they are in or in the life that they are in or whatever it might mean, right? So I feel like somewhere it is, for me, I feel sustainability with certain values of keeping environment consciousness in mind, having empathy for other people, other species, all of those aspects, and then having the skill to adapt, having the skill to kind of do problem solving. I think that's how I would say that sustainability needs to be kind of interpreted in a way when we're actually going about implementing it.
We'd also like to ask Nandini ma'am if she has anything to add.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, there won't be much choice for very long. We will, I mean, we will be forced into living more sustainably. That is in environmental terms, but I also really worry about cultural and social terms, that we are just losing so much every day. We're losing practices, we're losing little things which, I mean, now we are saying, okay, whatever, but in 10 years' time, it's going to be a huge loss. And this is also true about the biodiversity and things like that. So, really, we don't have that much choice. It is a do or die kind of situation. The pandemic has forced a lot of things on us. And it's a great example of a drastic situation that came suddenly upon us. And well, to be pessimistic, we're going to see more of these kinds of situations.
We also have some great insights in the chat, and we'd like to invite another audience member to join in. One thing that was said in the chat was that the colleges are failing to teach skills, which is impacting students in the organizations. And organizations have to give training for 6 months to 1 year to make them ready. Skill-based education is lacking. We would invite Rachita to expand on this.
So my question was, how can we develop ways to learn better when, like, the most accessible institution of education, which is schools and colleges, are not very inclusive of this way? Like, I remember when I was a kid, and like, I did not know of possible alternatives, even though I studied in a private school. So I'm curious about that.
Well, I attended this talk by Akar Patel, who heads Amnesty India in Amnesty International in India, and he was advising young people um, not to believe in anything they read. He said, just disbelieve what you read, what you see in the newspaper, what you hear on TV, disbelieve it. Talk to people, talk to your maid, talk to the person who's selling you vegetables, talk to the person on the street, and then you'll know the truth. So I found that so powerful, because this is something we don't do. We want everything to be packaged and given to us, preferably in a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 ways to do this, 10 ways to do that. So I think our schools and colleges actively discourage us from doing exactly this. They discourage us from stepping out and talking to people who are not like us. I mean, people say it's unsafe, and I don't know, so many things to just put yourself out there. But I would really agree with him on this, to go and just be in the world by yourself and form your own opinions on what is happening.
That's definitely, I think, one of the great ways to go about it. I think like it's a very like doable idea, and it's something that you can definitely kind of take up as well when you're there as a student. I don't know if there are any teachers in the audience, because that would have been interesting to have as well. Some of the teachers kind of comment on it as well. But yeah, I think like the just to add to that, because I definitely agree with it. It's also like I think the in my school and college as well, like the classes that I enjoyed the most was controversial topics which you could discuss with each other outside the class. Because then in that space you really understand how different people are viewing it, why, what reference points do they have, because of it they understood the topic that was taught in the class in a very different way from you. and it just helps understand it a lot better. So I think, like, one is, of course, like, as Nandini said, like, going out and speaking to people. But there is a whole resource, which is your colleague sitting next to you, or your classmate or friend sitting next to you as well. And tapping into that as well is like a good aspect to take up. But of course, like, I think, in like some of the schools, or some of the professors are already doing that. But like, I studied architecture, and I always remember this one professor who used to take exams in very interesting ways. He used to be like, bring your books, bring your notes, I don't care, because I will put the exam in such a manner that the notes are not going to help you. And usually, even if you're studying architecture, some of the exams are literally like, you have to learn plans of certain buildings and come and just draw it on paper. And he basically would come and say, his whole question sheet would be a long essay on how the gods have come together in heaven, and they need an architect to design heaven, and they've employed you to suggest to them which architect to choose and why, and give examples of their buildings as cases to the gods to actually say, yes, this is the person I want. And that really means that you need to know, their work, their philosophy, the examples of their buildings, the features that they use, the materials that they use, because that's what you need to make the case. And it was a way of examination where you were framing your own thought process. You were not just learning something and regurgitating it on a paper. You were forming an opinion, and you were discussing you were doing it, the exam, in teams. So you were discussing with each other and being like, why do you like this person and why do you not like this person? So it was a very different way of engaging. And I feel there is, of course, a lot that can be done in the way exams and things are structured itself, but having those conversations, outside of class, amongst your peers, amongst your the larger group, in the way that Nandini suggested, is, of course, like the ideal way to go about it.
Those are all really interesting things. We actually have another question from the chat box that we also wanted to ask, that is also a very important question when it comes to doing work in any field, I feel, but I'm really excited to hear how you would answer this. The question is about ethics, and how do morality and ethics play a part in sustainability?
Well, it is a core part, I guess. You cannot separate it. And definitely one person's sustainability is making the other person unsustainable. Uh, uh, that's a fact. And the next statement of environmental and economic sustainability is next to impossible, both of them going together. There's actually a movement worldwide called degrowth, which I've been reading about, which starts from an economic principle that we cannot continuously keep growing. There's no way. I mean, we can't, the world will collapse if our mind is trained to a growth mindset. So then what is the opposite of growth? How can we degrow? How can we go the other way? There is a lot of, I mean, some people think this is a slightly crackpot way of thinking. It's a hippie way of thinking. But people are thinking, and they are writing. There are conferences on this. There are so one simple idea was that everybody should work less. We should not be working and producing so much. So there is I mean, I feel these are all new horizons, and these are the things we should be talking and thinking about. We should not accept this whole growth idea as a given. So it's something, for example, I put forward to my students when we did the last project with Selco, because obviously when we visit a unit, whether it's a craft unit or whatever kind of unit, The question is, how do we increase production? How do we make more money? Which is all there, but how do we look at it from the point of view of degrowth? And these are places where you can be really creative in your thinking.
I would be keen to actually have Shahab share some thoughts on that as well. So someone please do catch hold of him and have him kind of respond to just his thoughts, because I know he's been kind of thinking about it a lot more, and that's where kind of the question comes from as well. But yeah, it's a tricky thing, and for me, the way that I kind of absorb it in my head or make peace with it is that again, like, you know, it's all related to learning to me, because like the what is ethics, what is more moral, you know, values, you know, all of those aspects is dependent on your experiences, your exposure, and how you're learning and the context that you're in, and all of those aspects. So I always feel that there's no like one right answer to it. But it is something that if you have an open mind and if you have a certain kind of orientation, like, you know, you have to just figure it out over a period of time. But the other, and of course, I think, like, you know, with things like ethics and moral, there's no right and wrong. Like, who are you to say your ethics and morals are wrong and yours are right? So it's always kind of understanding the other person, which becomes maybe very critical. But again, the other thing I wanted to just kind of comment on environmental and financial thing is I've been also like having debates with a lot of my friends to basically say that, you know, money is all constructed. You know, it's something that we have made as human beings. It's an idea that we've made as human beings, and what is expensive and what is not is also constructed. And I think, like, whenever we say, like, you know, green energy is expensive, you know, EVs are expensive, or, you know, I'm going by debates that often maybe we're part of, you know, investing in solar is expensive. Taking my previous example of Amazon, and I have nothing against Amazon, but Amazon should have sustainable packaging. You know, all of these aspects are constructs. If someone was giving investment to, in a certain way, you know, to companies to look at sustainability and not to look at, you know, data mining and what else investments are going in these days, you know, it would change. So these are all just constructs that we have in our mind, where we are saying something is expensive and something is not. And of course, systems are oriented in certain way, but no one is questioning it. And who's going to question it except us? So so I think, like, those are some of the things which of course need to be figured out. They are contemporary problems that we all need to get our minds around. But yeah, I'll pause there.
Thanks, Rachita. And for putting me on the spot like this. I was nicely just chatting away, being hidden. I actually don't have great thoughts on it, which is why I asked. I've been very confused. I, of course, I don't live a very sustainable life in my own expectations, but some of the thoughts that, like, you know, that are crossing my mind related to the first point that I made on the chat is that that sometimes, I mean, it's related to your point on doing less good and doing more good and doing less bad. Uh, there's a point at which doing good will be pointless, right? And we're already at that point, like Nandini said, that, I mean, it's already doomsday. So how much are we going to continuously keep doing good if if all of us and some people in particular are doing more bad? And somewhere we need to start moving towards that a little bit more as people, and myself. And then the second point was, of course, it's something that comes up in the kind of work that we do. A lot of environmental work is catered to a few people. It's not really mainstream because the mainstream is unsustainable and becomes a whole. So it's like almost like a bubble at times, but then how do you make that bubble mainstream is one part of it. And these are just thoughts, but I like that point on degrowth as well. I think that that's something that I'll probably read up on. Sorry, I don't have great thoughts to share.
That was really great insight. And actually, we got another question related a little bit to ethics by Siva in the chat, which says, how can one give suggestions to youth for a particular skills program, especially with decent livelihood options and impact of AI slash automation, which I think is a really interesting question. For me too, because coming from engineering, we always have to ask like, is the thing you're creating in the end, you think it's a good thing, but to other people, do they think it's a good thing? Is it ethical? And you always have to ask those questions, but sometimes we aren't encouraged to ever ask. So we would love to hear your insights on this question, starting with Professor Nandini.
Well, the idea of ethics is very old. I think Plato and Aristotle, it's from that time. And they said that you would know, each person would know. So it's not rules or laws or anything from outside. It's something inside you, and you develop it. It's what education is supposed to give you, that internal sort of compass which guides you in the right direction. About the question of AI and automation, now that's a given, right? Already in the automation industry, a lot of things are done by robots. I've been to a car factory and there are hardly any people there, and probably for good reasons, because many of that work is dangerous, or it's not good for human beings uh, to do that kind of thing. So that said, what would be the future? What would be valuable in terms of people? I think one is that the pandemic has changed a lot of things. A lot of human interaction has reduced. People are traveling less. What is probably going, I mean, these are all predictions which I've read in various websites. What is going to increase our work in healthcare, and healthcare would also mean things like wellness, in STEM, in creative work, in management. These are things which cannot be automated. Also, in this whole digital thing, we forget that we live in our physical world. We will always need plumbers, we'll always need carpenters, you know. So, skilling is going to be going in both directions. And my sense is that we will go back to a more craftsmanship way of thinking about physical skills. Like, people are going to be proud of their carpentry skills, for example. I mean, carpentry, which has been devalued now, is going to come back as an honorable and decent profession. So there will be these two sides, and I think there's making is the way forward. I'm a big advocate of working with your hands and understanding materials, and this is also to do with sustainability, because I feel a lot of us do not engage with our physical world. You look around you and you see how many materials are man-made and how many are natural, and how many you can recognize, and how do you know who made it and from where has it come from. You know, there's a huge gap which is growing, and there will be a going back to the physical world, going back to an understanding of material and technology which is very, very hands-on. And to me, this is a positive way of going forward towards sustainability. Once you become aware of what you're using, like I know who wear this jacket, where the fabric has been woven. It comes from Assam, but I don't know who made my laptop.
I wouldn't kind of what do you call it, feign kind of any knowledge on this topic. So I don't know much, and so I am kind of stopping myself from saying something which is something which is on the sector itself. But from my experience in Selco, which is something that I can kind of talk about, I what Nandini was saying as well, I really feel like when we're talking about skill programs and opportunities for youth, and we expand that definition to peri-urban, rural, youth and skills that are required or accessible or needed across all economic strata, it is basically two types which are going to emerge. And there is a lot of questioning that we do internally when we're talking about, and I'm not going to say automation, I'm going to say mechanization, which is basically something that is missing. And that leads us to question quality of jobs. Right, so there is that aspect of mechanization also, which definitely needs to be looked at purely from a development perspective. Even if you don't look at development, and I'm saying like human development as well as the growth development maybe. And that is something that requires a lot to be done on, both from innovation side, manufacturing side, new livelihoods that are going to come up, the way that livelihood opportunities are going to have a different type of trajectory itself. You are definitely having a carpenter who, when we imagine a carpenter right now, you imagine a saw going like this, right? Versus you have a sawing machine or you have a drilling machine. It sparks creativity in different ways. And it takes the drudgery out of the work. You will think about what can I do with carpentry rather than just doing that activity. And I think like mechanization, for me personally, the way that I have seen it has transformed the way that people have looked at their own skills and the way that people have built their livelihoods. And I think a lot of the times when we talk about mechanization, that aspect of quality of jobs and that aspect of aspiration and that aspect of, growth, personal growth, however it might be as well, gets missed out often. In that sense, I feel just thoughts on mechanization, that's something that to me is super critical as we move forward, and is a big aspect for me for social equity and social development and sustainability from that perspective.
Just to take that thought forward, I also believe that new technologies are going to help in this. Like, for example, if a carpenter has a 3D printer, which is going to become common in the next 10 years, he or she would use it far more creatively. So also production is going to move from these large and anonymous kind of factories which are in China or wherever, which are not in our horizon. They're going to come back to smaller spaces where the maker has more control. I mean, definitely this is going to be a trend going forward.
These thoughts are really something that we see a lot on social media now, like these debates on ethics and things like that, everything that's been mentioned here, and these ideas are often exchanged there. We wanted to ask the audience, before we ask the next question to the panelists, is we want you to ponder and write in the chat what you think about this. How can the young generation use social media to our advantage when it comes to sustainability and promoting the skills that have been discussed today? I actually want to pose this to my co-moderators. How do you think social media has impacted your life and when it comes to exchanging ideas?
Well, I think social media has both its advantages and disadvantages. And among its advantages, I'd say I've seen a lot of artists put up their work in platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and get a lot of exposure from there. There are small pieces of writings that people may not always feel confident to send out to a newspaper or to even show their parents or professor, but they can be there behind the screen and they can put up their writings up on social media. And if they get encouragement, then they are encouraged to build that skill further. And skills like writing or speaking or even reading are skills that are really important in today's world. And then when it comes to speaking, we can see that many post reels or videos also on social media, and there that provides a good platform for them. Instead of having to come out to people and talk, they can stand in front of the camera, be comfortable themselves, and put up whatever they feel is good. And even some other pieces of information that are disseminated across social media, like for example, this webinar can be quite useful to a lot of people, and maybe news about books and movies that people often like to share. I remember when I was young, I used to, every time I used to finish reading a book, I used to go up on the internet and search for quizzes. And after filling up the quizzes, I used to read what people had to say about the books or the movies that I watched in Reddit or a Twitter thread. I didn't want to create an account and participate myself that much because I was a little frightened of the internet at that time. But all those also provided really great insights for me to learn from. And I think discussions like that over a written platform, especially for those who may not always be comfortable speaking, is a great way to learn from social media. And then there's this part about rural youth also. Rural people from rural areas who do not have much connection to cities or to the skills that they come to cities to develop. They can always use social media for a lot of learning. The internet is a great tool for learning. It may not be used like that all the time, but it obviously has a lot of potential. And nowadays, all the rural people also have a lot of scope for getting smartphones, which are not that costly also, and using that as a learning tool. So yeah, I think social media can be really useful in that way.
So going off of that, what would Rachita ma'am have to say about seeing young people moving from villages who are going to develop skills as we discussed, as well as in search for jobs? How do we think instead of having to have them migrate to cities, make villages the hub for learning?
I mean, I think there has to be a lot done to shift the conversation around on entrepreneurship, innovation, or even when we're talking about the livelihood space or skilling space itself, expanding that to the needs of the rural youth also, or even if it's not rural youth, forget rural youth, rural development itself. Because I feel a lot of the skilling institutes that might be there is kind of more of a training for workforce, which are more accessible to, I would say, youth from lower socioeconomic strata. So that opportunity as a whole, we need to really expand. The other aspect that also is there is, and let me maybe expand on what I mean by that as well, is that, you have training institutes or skilling institutes, even in rural areas. And the main kind of trainings that they give is really kind of skill based and more on like tailoring, plumbing, electrician, right? So you're always going to be employed somewhere. And you're always going to be employed in a place which offers economies of scale. So it is going to be in bigger factories. You are going to be just a workforce there. And we hardly have any skilling or training which is a little bit broader in terms of other skills that are required for you to even scour the market. I think, when we talk about livelihood, like, no one would ask, many of us who are joining this panel, thinking that, you're insecure about your job in the future. You will manage. You will accommodate, you will evolve your skills, you will evolve the opportunities that are available to you, you will pitch yourself, you will learn, you will be able to do that. But a lot of the opportunities that we're creating right now and the way that we're looking at skilling is not giving people that foundation, that root, that kind of base to kind of leverage on. Even, for example, like the other day was, you have so many of these, young people. I often am like talking to the drivers, the Ola and Uber drivers on, and you realize that most of them have migrated to the city in the past 3 to 5 years because of, certain debt that was there because of COVID crisis recently, or, whatever it might be there. They have migrated to Bangalore to do that. But it's such a short-term role. right? And they all have fabrication units at the back. They've all been farmers in the back. They've all had shops in the back. So they actually had like business skills, fabrication skills. They had farming skills, and they're not really looking at that as the future at all, because they don't know how to upgrade their skills there, because there's no opportunity available. And in a space like Ola and Uber, is there a growth trajectory in that at all? You'll be a driver. You will just be a driver. You don't even have an opportunity like how you did in the old school, industrial days, where you start working in the manufacturing unit, but then you grow to be a manager. You grow to be, the person who's handling logistics. You grow to be something else. There is a trajectory that is there. But a lot of the job opportunities and the way that we're looking at skilling is very, very short term. You're not looking at building that ladder that people are able to climb. So that is something that is kind of definitely missing. That being said, that's the problem statement that we have at hand. But it is, you in a place like India specifically, and this, of course, a lot of my Selco colleagues would already know, but you have a lot of agri training institutes. You have polytechnic schools that are there. You have industrial training institutes. You have many opportunities, but we need to be able to upgrade that quickly, to be able to respond to some of these needs as well, and make them aspirational kind of viewpoints. So a lot of work needs to happen to actually upgrade them to serve as these learning hubs, innovation hubs, and not just looking at developing a skill and going and finding a job only. So there is definitely a lot of potential that lies there, but the same amount of focus needs to go in developing those, the way that we are developing the other parts of our education system, so to say. See the difference, no? We talk about skilling in rural areas and we talk about education in urban areas. I don't know if there's a difference in our language there itself. But yeah.
Well, I think one big skill that everybody learns is learning to learn, right? As you said, we can pick ourselves up. If you're out of job, you know how to go on to the next. So probably the polytechnics and skill institutions in rural areas should offer programs periodically, later also. So obviously you need a job, obviously you need a trade to begin with. So you learn to be a plumber, but you should be able to go back to college after 5 years, 10 years and pick the next level of skill up. I think that's really important, which we do very automatically. Like I learned how to code a website. So I think Ishita has got a question about craft, homegrown, and Ishita, do you want to expand on this?
Yeah, there's a question here about homegrown and local crafts and how they do not have to trickle down from runways and materials. In college, we don't really have the experience or mindset to understand the overall context enough to really propose an impactful solution or revive a craft. Engagement is also short term, and most outcomes are also short term. The revived craft cannot sustain, and thus the outcomes are not sustainable. The program is designed to sustain itself. So, we'd like to ask Rachita, how can educational institutions redesign their approach to redirect their resources or intentions to help? Nandini, you can also add to this.
Yeah, so obviously you cannot revive a craft in 3 months. The craft is 100 or more than 100 years old, and it's obviously not possible that you, with your whatever limited knowledge and skills, can go and miraculously, everybody is happy and thriving. This was a question asked to me when I was doing a workshop with jewelry artisans maybe 15 years back. That so what's the difference between you and that artisan? Is the only difference that you have a computer and you can browse the net and come up with ideas? Is that the only difference? Because you can't craft a necklace or a pair of earrings, whereas that artisan can. So then what are you doing? What's your skill set? So this idea of revival or livelihood in craft is very complex. It obviously cannot happen in a few months. It takes years, and it's not only the designer or the student who's going. It's the whole system which pulls it up. It's the whole marketing. It's the NGO involved. It's not one person's. I cannot claim to have revived anything for anybody. But what a 3-month experience in college can give you is at least an introduction to that context and at least a lifelong love for that context, which is what happened to me. So something I did in college for 2 weeks led me to an almost lifelong engagement with this sector. Um, so that's the only, and even when I take students, when they use words like revive, it makes me very angry, and I say no. You actually, it's the other way. We have to go there and learn from those practices, from those ways of working. It is the other way around. And in fact, educational institutes should work on that aspect. That instead of going abroad to sustainability school in the south of France, there is a school like that. We should go to Orissa and learn from the Dokra artisan there and pay him for it.
That's very, very interesting, actually. And we've actually touched on so many different topics, and we're all feeling very inspired. Thank you for that last answer. That was really cool to listen to. We want to start concluding this panel. Based on everything that has been said today, is there one piece of advice that you would give to young people who aspire to be sustainable leaders in the future? Rachita, ma'am, you can start and
Saying a lot already, but I think going back to like the first question, or which was more in terms of like skills that we feel are needed for tomorrow, I'll maybe just like summarize a few thoughts on that. Just I really feel like, you know, we all need to go towards skilling, jobs, you know, all of those things from a problem solving perspective and not from doing a job perspective. We need to orient ourselves towards learning. And I'm really saying that even for everyone's mental health, you know, because COVID is just one of the things. You know, we're going to have multiple things that are going to be thrown at us, and we need to learn to flexibly kind of move, adapt, you know, and that can only be done if you have, you know, really kind of set a mindset which is more towards learning, you know, on problem solving. It's going to be kind of critical because, you know, even if there are people in audience who want their own enterprises, who are setting their own life goals, you know, things will come in the way, and you will have to kind of get up and run with it. So like in conclusion, I think a lot of the things that we've been saying, you know, I really feel personally like, you know, the base or fundamental goal that we all need to have is you know, that kind of a mindset, and it will really, you know, help us understand things better, our role better, you know, orient ourselves better, and ourselves in the system better as well. So I'll pause there.
I think the word that comes to my mind from what you said, Rachita, is resilience. We need to be far more resilient in ourselves and in our work. Things are going to fail. Shit is going to hit the fan, but we just have to pull ourselves by our socks and learn how to do that. Learn how to be resilient. Learn and move forward. Things won't go our way for sure. Everything won't go our way. Some things will.
We don't mean to end it in a, you know, mood that brings everyone down. But I think it's a very exciting space to be in a sense, like, please see it that way, that, you're going to learn so much. And you need to kind of adapt quickly, and it needs be experimental, and just be fine with it, and go with the flow. So I think Nandini and I both don't mean to kind of sound so morose. But I think it comes from the fact that we all don't have that failure embracing and learning mindset, which is why we always feel like, oh my god, like things are going crazy, I didn't plan for it. But let's kind of change our mindset and go towards that, and then it's an interesting kind of life that we will have, hopefully. But yeah,
There's a Chinese saying, no, may you live in interesting times. And we've got that. We've got that.
I think that's definitely what this is, and encourages us to be failing and be okay with that in these interesting times. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for all of your very interesting answers. They were very inspiring for us, at least, and hopefully the rest of the audience who has joined in today. We hope we have been able to address the skills, only some of the skills required today in the context of sustainability, and raise more questions regarding our roles in this context as individuals and as a larger group.
We also hope we have been able to push forward sustainability as a lifestyle, as a module into our professional and personal lives. We hope that a way forward will be that how today you have all brought up several interesting and thought-provoking questions. So moving forward, we would love it for you to keep thinking and make these questions actionable.
Especially in different sectors like health, education, encouraging more women innovators, and much more. Thank you to everyone for coming today, and especially the panelists. If you have any further questions and want to continue engaging and exploring in sustainable opportunities, you can reach out to info@catalyze.tech. It'll also be put in the chat, and we look forward to hearing from you and more questions that you have. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you.
thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for inviting me. Hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.